There are stories that the Old West never confirmed, not because they were impossible, but because no one wanted to be the first to record them. Some of them survived only as warnings, repeated in hushed voices, far from saloons and official records. This is one of those stories. They say that at midnight sharp, the bells rang. There was no wind, no hands, no one. Each time the sound echoed through the valley, another house stood empty, doors left open, food still on the table, beds still warm. No screams, no struggle. People simply left. When the final bell stopped ringing, the town fell silent. And the silence was worse than the sound, because those bells were not marking time. They were choosing who would disappear next. Back when I was known as sheriff, I learned one thing. When an entire town avoided looking in the same direction, it was hiding something. Strange stories were common in the Old West, but this one wasn't told in saloons. It was whispered like a warning, a forgotten town, an abandoned church, and bells that rang by themselves, always at midnight. I went there expecting superstition. What I found was organized fear. People who already knew what would happen, and stayed anyway. This is not a story about ghosts. It's about what answers when something calls in the dark, and that town answered. Before the bells became an omen, the town had a name too ordinary to remember. It was born like so many others in the Old West: dust, promise, and haste. A stopping point along trade routes, surrounded by dry hills and a valley where sound carried farther than it should. The first structure built was the well. The second, the saloon. The church came later, not out of faith, but tradition. The oldest records of local history stated that the bell was brought from afar, cast in the east, and hauled for weeks on a wagon that lost 2 oxen along the way. It was far too heavy for such a small town, yet someone insisted it would remain there for a very long time. No one could remember who said it. For years the bell served its purpose. It marked funerals, warned of fires, called meetings, until slowly it began to be avoided. The first strange record did not come from a townsman. It came from a ledger. In the old sheriff's office, there was a brief note, written in haste, dated on a moonless night. Bell rang at 12 a.m. No one in the tower. No signature. No explanation. The next morning, nothing seemed different. The town woke up, shops opened. The day went on. Some claimed they heard the bell. Others swore they hadn't. The matter died before sunset. But that night, it happened again. This time louder, longer. The sound crossed the valley as if pushed by something unseen. Dogs howled. Horses stirred. And an entire family failed to show up for breakfast. The house was untouched. No signs of struggle. No sign of escape. Only silence. And the lingering echo of the bell still vibrating in the town's memory. From that week on, no one climbed the tower again. Not out of fear of what might be up there, but fear of what might answer. That night, I didn't sleep, not out of bravery, but because something about that town made sleep inconvenient, as if closing your eyes was a tactical mistake. I sat in a chair facing the window of the old sheriff's office. From there, I had a clear view of the church tower. The wood creaked in the cold. My pocket watch marked time with a sharp, irritating tick. 5 minutes to midnight. The town was too quiet. No footsteps. No distant voices. Not even the usual wind crossing the valley. It was a heavy silence, unnatural, as if waiting for permission. When the watch struck exactly 12 o'clock, the first bell rang. No delay, no hesitation. The sound arrived fully formed, as if it had been moving before it was heard. A deep, heavy toll that passed through walls and bone. The second followed, then the third. I rose instinctively and stepped toward the door. That's when I noticed something wrong. The tower was dark, no lantern, no silhouette, no movement, and yet the bell kept ringing. Each toll felt closer, as if the sound itself were shifting, not from the tower, but from within the town, as if space itself were folding. Then I heard something else. Footsteps, slow, measured, not coming from the main street, coming from everywhere at once. They didn't echo like normal steps. The sound was muted, like someone walking on wet earth or something older. I didn't go outside. I remembered the warning. When the final bell rang, the footsteps stopped. The sound died instantly. No echo, no farewell. By morning, the town was different. One less house with smoke in the chimney, a horse still tied without its owner, and a mark on the ground right in the center of the main street. It wasn't a footprint. It wasn't a trail. It was as if something had stopped there, just to listen. It took me 3 days to see the pattern, and once I did, I understood why no one dared investigate it further. The disappearances were not random. They always came after the third toll of the bell, always at midnight, always in absolute silence. But there was more. Those who vanished, because disappeared no longer felt accurate, shared something in common. Every one of them was tied, directly or indirectly, to the town's founding. The blacksmith who vanished in the second week was the grandson of one of the men who first dug the well. The family that disappeared overnight had inherited the house where the bell was stored before the tower was built. Even the old school teacher, the last to teach children in town, carried a surname listed in the earliest records. I began reviewing old documents, land deeds, birth certificates, forgotten notes stuffed into drawers no one opened anymore. That's when I found something that shouldn't exist, a map, hand-drawn on yellowed paper, showing the town. Before it existed, the streets were already there. The tower marked with a strange symbol, and at the center, a dark circle scratched deeply into the page. In the corner, a single sentence. The bell calls what was promised. Promised to whom? The oldest residents avoided the question, not out of ignorance, but exhaustion. They had asked it before, and the answer never came in words. That night, I realized something worse. The list wasn't shrinking. It was being completed. The names crossed out on the map matched the missing. Only a few remained, including mine. That's when I understood the town wasn't being punished. It was being collected. The truth wasn't contained in a single document. It was scattered in fragments, pieces of guilt left behind. The first real clue came from a journal. It belonged to one of the founders, a man with no official title, yet whose name appeared in nearly every major record. The pages were stained, as if once soaked and left to dry in the sun. He wrote sparingly, and when he did, he avoided certain words. He mentioned a drought that lasted far longer than it should have, a well that refused to produce water, nights when the valley seemed to answer if someone spoke too loudly. Then, on a nearly illegible page, a sentence repeated itself. It was not a prayer. I kept reading. On the final night before the town began to thrive, the founders climbed the hill where the church now stood. They carried the bell still wrapped in cloth. Not to summon anything, but to offer it. The text didn't describe a ritual. No clear symbols. No spoken invocations. Only a silent agreement. An unspoken understanding that something was being asked, and something would be given in return. The next morning, the well overflowed. The crops survived. Trade routes held. The town lived. But the journal made one thing clear. No one believed it had been free. The bell was not raised to celebrate. It was raised to remember. Each toll was a reminder that a debt existed, and that one day it would be collected. The founders died before paying it. So did their children, but an agreement does not age. It waits, and at midnight, when the world grows thinner between one day and the next, the bell simply does what was agreed upon. It calls. That night no one slept, not because we awaited the bell. We awaited the choice. The town had shrunk to only a few lit houses. The rest stood dark, as if already forgotten by the world itself. The wind returned, but uneven, erratic, as if avoiding certain streets. I knew my name was on the map. I knew it wasn't coincidence. At 11:58, the bells began to vibrate before they rang. A low sound, almost imperceptible metal pressed against something unseen. It was different that night. Closer, personal. When the first toll echoed, I was already outside. No surprise, no fear, only recognition. With each toll, the air seemed to compress. The lights in the remaining houses went out one by one, not as if switched off, but as if no longer needed. On the third toll, I felt the presence. It had no shape, no voice, but it occupied space. It didn't come from the tower. The tower was only the instrument. The call came from beneath my feet, from the well, from the foundations, from the pact buried along with the town. Then I understood. The bell didn't choose randomly. It called those who still listened, those who remained, those who knew, those who remembered. When I stepped forward, the sound stopped. The silence returned, heavier than ever. By morning, the town was gone. Not ruins, not ashes, only the empty valley. And the bell, lying on the ground, split in two. Some debts don't need to be paid twice. I never returned to that valley, not out of fear. Some places don't need revisiting. They continue to exist, even after they vanish from the map. Over the years, I heard other stories. Towns where doors open by themselves. Roads that return those who tried to leave. Wells that whisper forgotten names. All different. All the same. Because the Old West wasn't built only on gunmen and expanding frontiers. It was built on hurried choices and agreements never written down. That town wasn't cursed. It simply honored the deal. And the bells. They never rang at random. They only ring when someone is still willing to listen.